Although my own experience as teacher and researcher has been a rewarding one, authors like John Hattie and Herbert Marsh, as well as Paul Ramsden and Ingrid Moses, have argued that there is no reinforcing relationship between teaching effectiveness and research productivity. But as usual, as far as musicians and critical theorists are concerned, not everything in life is about productivity and effectiveness. As such, other authors speak of the benefits of the teaching-research nexus. Joanna Anala and Marita Mäkinen studied the nexus in relation to curriculum design, with some participants envisioning a dynamic design that acts as catalyst for research. Additionally, Marie Magnol, Johan Soderlind, and Lars Geschwind have highlighted the tension that can arise within higher education institutions due to workload imbalances and institutional rigidity. They also highlight, however, the multifaceted nature of the nexus, which also includes bidirectional paths where student interactions actively advance a teacher's own research clarity. I will refer to this last point as it partially speaks to my own experience of the nexus. I have found that while mostly separate in their execution, teaching and researching both benefit from each other and can serve to expand a teaching academic's horizons, both as a professional and as a person. This is triply true for anyone who is an academic, a teacher, and also a practicing composer and musician, which is the experience I will speak about here. I'd like to start by explaining my research in a bit more detail. I am conducting a cross-comparison of various cyberpunk films, television series, and video games in order to uncover their music and sound effects relation to the narrative. I frame this relationship between music, sound effects, and narrative by adapting a term from popular music studies, authentication. I borrow this term from the scholarship of Sarah Rubbidge and Alan Moore to translate the way the music and sound effects may or may not function within the context of a specific scene within a text or of a larger overarching multimedia narrative. Authentication is drawn from the larger field of academic scholarship on popular music authenticity, although this has been mostly focused on the property of authenticity itself. To understand my application of the term, it helps to borrow Sarah Rubbidge's own words. Authenticity is therefore not a property of, but something we ascribe to a performance. In his paper, Authenticity as Authentication, Alan Moore echoes this notion, reconceptualizing authenticity as something ascribed, rather than inscribed in a performance or artist. Nevertheless, both authors still focus on the property of authenticity and how its ascription to a performance or artist may render them authentic in the eyes of an audience or not. But rather than focusing on that, I'm more interested in the concept of authentication itself and how it can be applied to screen music composition practices and musicology. As it turns out, the practice of composing music for screen media has a lot to do with authenticating a narrative for an audience or player. Whether it be a film, a television series episode, or a video game, the screen music composer is always working within a larger creative framework and helping to realize the narrative in the minds of its viewers or players. Here, I redefine authentication to mean precisely this process, the realization of a narrative in the mind of its audience. Authentication can be positive or negative, depending on whether a particular music cue or sound effect successfully connects with other narrative elements or not. Claudia Gordman describes this interaction between a film and its music as a set of connotative systems, something also stated by Catherine Kalinack, who positions film music as always working within, quote, a network of mutual implication. I co-opt authentication to describe the set of processes which relate the music back to the narrative in this network of mutual implication and thus realize it in the mind of the audience or player. But what does any of this have to do with teaching, or the so-called teaching research nexus? Two of the lectures I teach are called Music and Authenticity and Music and Screen Media. There, I cover these and other perspectives of the concept and the numerous different applications to both popular music and screen media. I often question the students throughout my lectures in an effort to keep them actively engaged with a lecture and give them multiple chances to figure things out for themselves. From my experience so far, students often begin the lecture with the common conception of authentic, meaning true or not fake. This made me realize that perhaps composers and songwriters who are not keyed into the multiple meanings of the word authenticity may still end up creating something which authenticates the larger narrative in which their music is situated. Keith Negus and Pete Astor cite Quentin Skinner's study of how people may use the same words in varied ways and expand this notion to the word authenticity itself. In their words, following this, we might think about how people may use the English word authenticity without being aware of the range of meanings of the term, or without knowledge of how this may differ from the ways others use the word. Where Moore shifts the question of authenticity, quote, to who rather than what is being authenticated, this realization made me aware that in my own conception and application of authentication to screen music, narrative events are quite often authenticated, even without the composer or sound designer's own awareness of the term's meaning. This led to a myriad of different insights into the emerging properties of highly collaborative creative works, such as films, television series, and video games, including that those very texts require the question to be placed on what rather than who, if we are to uncover the connections between sound and narrative therein. But what are the changes, if any, in compositional practices and musicological analysis if one is aware of this concept of authentication while analyzing or creating music? I had the opportunity to somewhat test this notion on two separate occasions. One was in composing my latest release, an EP called Vereor, timed to release on Halloween of 2025. This was conceived around the narrative theme of fear, hence the Latin name for the word, and it was meant to pay homage to some of the composers that have scared me or made me feel the most uncomfortable. The concept of authentication shifted my mindset away from conventional horror music tropes, such as high-pitched violin tremolos, to simply focusing on the narrative concept and what kind of sounds, musical or otherwise, caused me the most fear or sense of discomfort. The other occasion during which I tested this was in a recent songwriting class. There, I taught a group of 4 students who were struggling with different aspects of the practice, from creating chord progressions, to arranging, to writing lyrics. This last aspect, unexpectedly, or perhaps quite naturally, ties in with the previous notion. What is songwriting, after all, if not connecting music and narrative? And so, over the course of the class, we worked together on finding ways to improve their songwriting skills, particularly this aspect of connecting music and narrative. I explained this connection between music and narrative, gave a couple of film examples, and then worked with them to develop their songs and songwriting skills. Something seemed to change in some of the students' perspectives by recognizing that songwriting too can be a vehicle for authenticating thoughts, feelings, or even complex concepts and narratives. Of course, this was by no means a designed and controlled experiment, nor does it have any statistical relevance that makes it generalizable or scalable. But it does serve to show how some of my research has impacted and improved my teaching, specifically by showing students a different way of thinking during their songwriting or composition practice. Equally, in the case of my own practice, it has also served me well in my own creative practice, allowing for the creation of a conceptual EP with a different conceptual method. I found another example of the teaching research cycle in another lecture I teach, called Music and Technology. In it, I talk about some of the history of technological developments and how they have affected music. Things like Eurovision and its cultural and political origins that remain present and relevant to this day, or the history of computation and how it is tied to the history of audio recording technology, and also created a whole new field of music composition in gaming, or more recently, the rapid capital advancement of technology companies and how they control, among other things, some of the ways in which the music industry moves, with particular impact on musicians and creatives. At first, this lecture may seem to amount to a rushed overview of recent technological history, but it ties back to the teaching-research nexus because it resonates deeply with my chosen topic of study. Cyberpunk is a branch of science fiction that is particularly concerned with the more pessimistic views of human technological development. Cyberpunk's mix of, quote, high-tech, low-life, as Bruce Sterling put it in his famous preface to William Gibson's Neuromancer, presents its audiences with anti-establishment anti-heroes who act on the fringes of dystopian and corrupt societies, with high technological development contrasting with a low standard of life. As such, the study of cyberpunk media music necessarily must involve a critical study of its societies, especially when looking for connections between music and narrative. This has been an aspect of continued learning, drawn from teaching in our joint module of critical perspectives. It has informed my critique of cyberpunk through the study of critical theory applied to technology, but also race, gender, class, religion, and sexuality, as well as other key aspects. The teaching research nexus has, in my experience, been a fruitful cycle that has improved both my teaching and my research. Aside from the aspects already mentioned, I experienced other benefits as well. Being in contact with lectures that were not my main area of focus has often broadened my knowledge and contextualized my own research within the larger musicological field. As far as efficiency and productivity are concerned, I admit that it is sometimes difficult to maintain a healthy balance between the two activities. The ever-increasing workloads are certainly a challenge, as many of us have surely felt. The increasingly commercial nature of higher education also does not help, because it detracts from its true purpose of fostering critical thinking and providing an intellectually proactive learning environment. But this also provides an opportunity for reflection on how best to approach being a researcher and a teacher, as well as a practicing musician. Perhaps it is not the duty of the teacher-researcher to be efficient, but instead to provide a learning environment which benefits from the inquisitive mind of a researcher. These circumstances also provide an opportunity for higher education institutions and for us, as individual professionals, to attempt a truly integrated paradigm that leans on the multiplying strengths of what we research and how we teach. Thank you for watching and listening. This has been my paper on screen music authentication and the popular music classroom. Thank you again to the conference committee for accommodating my absence. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out at my email address. Thank you.